And I'm your host, Mark Evans. And on today's show, we've got a really great guy, someone I've gotten to know a little bit over the past couple of months, Mr. Kevin Holland. Welcome to the Inside the Sales Playbook show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, Kevin is the director of sales at Jellyvision, one of the tech stars in Chicago, and they do interactive employee engagement. But Kevin, I'm hoping you can give the audience just a little bit more context. What is Jellyvision, the company that you're currently at, and maybe you can walk us through a little bit of your career history as well, and how do you help them achieve their mission?
Sure. Yeah. So Jellyvision's main product is called Alex, and it's a software tool that helps employees become more empowered to make smart decisions around the benefits that they choose and the benefits that they use. And ultimately, our goal is to help our customers, both employers and employees, make smarter decisions that have real financial impact on both the employer and their employees.
Yeah, I could imagine. But let's kind of start back a little bit earlier. I'm really curious, Kevin, of all the things you could have done, and I know we've talked a little bit and you've got a great career, how you've got to where you are today. But man, how the hell did you even choose the career of sales? Because I know there's a lot of things you could have been doing.
Yeah, I think it chose me, to be honest with you. Yeah, when I left school way back in 19 whatever it was.
Don't date it. Don't date it.
It was a long time ago. I certainly didn't leave school going, hey, you know what I want to do? Be a sales guy.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate, quite frankly, to have been offered the opportunity these many years ago, and just found that I had, as it turns out, an affinity to it. And then back in the early 2000s, a career pivot of sorts, not necessarily out of sales, but into a completely different industry. I wound up in the consulting space, and specifically around learning solutions in the B2B application, and found that not only I had an affinity for it, but it was one of those things that you could wake up in the morning and be sort of proud of, like, hey, I'm going to sell something to somebody hopefully today, but at the end of it, it's actually going to help people, right? It's going to help people develop in their careers. It's going to help people get that next job. It's going to help the employer solve human capital problems and dilemmas. And so, like, you could wake up and go, yeah, you know what? This is actually, I'm in some small way, we're doing good here.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this, Kevin, because I'm really curious, and I'm sure the listeners would as well. Did you have a career in the past where you are at a position, and you obviously don't have to say the name, but were you ever in a scenario before that where you were waking up and being like, hey, I either don't believe in the solution, I don't believe in the result we can give people? And how did that impact your sales? And then what's it like to take the red pill, right? And walk through that door and then have this where you're fired up every morning because you do believe in the solution or the product or the result?
Yeah, that's a really that's a good one. Back in the late 90s, I had spent the majority of that decade working for a series of companies, largely owned by the same people or whatever. There's a whole story there, but it was primarily contract manufacturing. We did some reselling of telecom and datacom boxes, and we had some installation business, right? Basically dragging cable through ceilings.
Yeah.
But the majority of the business was the contract manufacturing. And in the late 90s, that kind of business was largely moving overshore to places like China and Mexico and so on and so forth. And so it became very difficult to compete in that industry when your primary centers of manufacturing were US based, right? That was just the nature of it. And so the company I was working for at the time started to form joint partnerships with entities in other countries. And the more we got to learn about some of the conditions back then in those places that those employees were having to operate and endure, quite frankly, it became I became less and less comfortable with trying to represent that to people, quite frankly.
Wow.
And then what really necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah.
When in 1999, most of our customers were in the telecom datacom space, and that industry went to heck, right?
Spoiler alert: the bottom dropped out. Yeah,
the bottom dropped out, and then the .com bubble followed soon thereafter, and so my discomfort met also the necessity of kind of trying to go, okay, what do I want to do when I grow up?
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I want to try to get into consulting, not really understanding or knowing what that meant at the time. But I was fortunate enough to find a spot with a company that took a flyer on me, despite my lack of having the experience in it.
That's awesome.
And thus, Career 2.0 was born.
There we go. Everybody's got to have a good career pivot like that. That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Well, let's pivot here a little bit too. So, I mean, it sounds like from your background, your history, you've been at a lot of fast growing companies. I know we've talked about that in the past. What do you think makes a really good sales leader, sales director, sales manager for a very fast growing company?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the $100,000 question, isn't it?
Maybe even more.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think it's a combination of probably three things, right? Obviously, the intellect, right? So what does that mean? Well, it's like, yeah, everybody's got to be smart to some degree, but also like that sort of voracious intellectual curiosity. Because the continuous learning, like that's a real thing in a fast growing, whatever it is, right? So somebody that can, really embrace the curiosity and be willing to learn and change based on what they're learning as they go. So that an agile mindset, if you will, right?
Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And two, a certain amount of humility, right? Because to have an agile mindset, you have to be willing to admit that you were wrong and then do something meaningful about it.
Yeah.
Right. So a certain amount of humility, I think, is important. And then three, a certain amount of empathy for everybody you come into contact with. Certainly your teams, your leadership, your partners in the business, and also the customers that that you have defined as your addressable market. I think those three things in combination are what I've seen the leaders who have inspired me. They all had those traits in common.
Yeah. And now, are those the traits you look for when looking to promote your next generation of sales leader as well? And if so, do you have any way in which you're trying to maybe calculate isn't the right way, but are there any checkpoints that you look for with each of these three categories? They're like, that person has that, she has that, he has that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the tricky part about, those kinds of qualities. They're somewhat subjective, right? They're difficult to objectively measure. Outside of, obviously those things in combination are going to generate results, right? And so, you can sort of look at the scoreboard and over time and see, well, okay, this person manages to get teams to get to good outcomes. So that's the first one. The second one would be then, and do the teams want to continue to follow them over time, right?
Yeah.
So I think those two things may be in combination, but it's more about looking at how they perform over time. And so again, it gets a little subjective, but I know I've followed people from company to company that, I wanted to work for.
Yeah.
And, I've been fortunate enough to have built some relationships with teams, some of the folks on my teams along the way that I enjoy that as well. And so that to me is kind of the greatest measure of success for myself. Like, hey, we're going to get to outcomes. We're going to, produce the results that reflect on the scoreboard. So we get paid to do. But what's more important to me is what's the legacy I'm creating and as evidenced by what.
Yeah, I really like that. So, I mean, kind of a insight for any sales manager, maybe up and coming sales manager, someone that wants to get into a sales leadership type role. If you don't have people following you from one company to the next or requesting to be on your team, or if you have a lot of turnover on your team, sounds like that could be a real red flag for you to say, hey, I better look at myself in kind of these three areas of intellect, humility, and empathy. And are you demonstrating those? And not just demonstrating, but are you actually living those for your team? Sounds really important.
Yeah. I saw something on LinkedIn recently, and it's one of the sales leaders that I follow. And I'm sorry, I can't quote him specifically because his name escapes me right now. But his post was basically, when we wind up having to fire somebody or they quit, and it's inside the first 12 or 24 months, like that's a failure on leadership, right? And he continues to take that very personally. And I feel the same way. Like that really resonated with me because it's like, look, whether it's a kid fresh out of school or somebody who, just got married and is going to start planning a family or already has a family.
Yeah.
The people that are trusting us that we're going to set them up for success.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't happen, and right, best of intentions, it happens, right? It's the nature of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
But when that doesn't happen, there's a tendency to sort of blame the person who we hired, not here, but in general, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, we absolutely should be flipping that around and going, where did we fail? Right? Was it in the screening process? Was it during the onboarding? Were we not clear in what that person was going to have to do to be successful? Like, where did we fall down? And hopefully from that reflection, adjustments can be made that mitigate that from happening again in the future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think it's really, right, that's really critical to give yourself that level of ownership too of, hey, it's not that person, what's broken on our side. I really, really like that. Well, I think that's a good transition too. Let's talk a little bit about onboarding and training. You've been at a lot of really successful companies. You've probably implemented these onboarding and training programs. So I'd be really curious, what do you think in your mind makes a really effective onboarding and training process? And what are just maybe a couple elements you could share with the listeners of a really good onboarding and training process?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it definitely starts with the partnership that we enjoy with the talent recruiting team, right? Are we setting them up for success? Are our job descriptions right? Are we helping them identify the right candidates? Do we have a good partnership there?
Yeah. So building a relationship with whoever's doing the full-time recruiting, whether that's an agency or whether that's an internal asset.
Exactly. Especially, I mean, I was going to say, especially if it's an agency, I don't think it changes, but obviously it's just even more challenging when you're working with an agency because, right, they don't know your culture the way that you do intrinsically. But beyond that, the onboarding experiences, one is ensuring that we're not trying to jam too much down their throats too soon. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Drinking from the fire hose, right? That's exactly what everybody says. Hey, our training process, we throw you in at the deep end and hopefully you can swim. What do you think of like that kind of approach and how do you go against that?
Yeah, well, and we all know from experience, but also neuroscience tells us that we're going to only retain this much of that stuff. So if you're throwing a fire hose at people, one, it's highly ineffective. Two, it's a frustrating onboarding experience for that person. And three, you're probably going to have to repeat the process 3 or 4 times before the important bits stick, right?
Yeah.
So the opposite of that is understanding that you're not going to put a salesperson in a seat and they're ready to be productive in 30 days. It's just an unrealistic expectation. I think in most applications, certainly in the B2B business, things have gotten more complicated, not less, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule for anything. And it's probably what level of preparedness do you want them? What's acceptable at your organization?
I've never operated in sort of a B2C kind of call center sort of environment. So, I can't speak to that specifically, but certainly in the businesses that I've operated in, we got to slow our roll, right?
Yeah.
And so, that onboarding process. So I'll give you an example where here today, and I was fortunate to walk into Jellyvision's onboarding process that is quite well done. Mm-hmm. And it's literally close to a quarter's worth of stuff, right? Hey, you're getting productive awesome. As you go.
Yeah.
But we really have chunked it out. The first couple of weeks are just sort of getting to know the business, the people. Where's the water cooler? Back when we were in offices, right? How do you?
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember those days? Getting your laptop set up, that kind of basic stuff, right? Like, hey, give the person a week to just get their legs underneath them, right?
Yeah.
Then we can start talking about, hey, what's our industry? What's our place in it? Who are our competitors? Who are our enemies? Who are our friends? Who are our frenemies? Just what's our place in the ecosystem? So that we have a kind of a baseline and a context that we can then start to drill down into the specifics around. Now, here is what you need to know and how you need to do as a salesperson to ultimately be successful over time. If we sort of think about it, it's like, okay, welcome to the company. Here are people. Here's your seat. Here's how you're going to get set up. All that kind of stuff. It's okay. Here's go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And the next couple of weeks then are about, hey, what's the industry? What's our place in it? et cetera, et cetera. And then it's like, okay, the next 6 weeks, we are going to start to prepare you to be successful in the role in which we've hired you to fill.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I know culture is a really important aspect for you as well, as I'm sure it has been at a lot of the companies you've been at. So how do you incorporate or try to incorporate elements of your culture into this new like onboarding and training process, if you do?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Every place has sort of some version of the shorthand for what their culture is. We call it Schmutz Pack here.
Schmutz Pack. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, and it's derived from a book called Radical Candor. I think the author's name is Kim Scott, if I'm not mistaken. I should probably put that
I'll link it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's Radical Candor. The premise is basically we owe it to our colleagues and teammates and employees to be direct, but coming from an empathic place, right? The feedback we're going to give you may sting a little bit in the moment, but it's intended to help you get better. And the Schmutz Pack is basically like, hey, if you sit down and you've got a bunch of spinach in your teeth, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
Hey, you got spinach in your teeth. You might want to run to the bathroom and take care of that. And then, we'll carry on with our meeting.
That's almost like the cultural test, right? If I feel confident to say that to you, Kevin, as a new hire, or maybe I'm a new hire and have that ability, that's got to be a real empowering moment for either the employee or for the leader in that situation. Say like, oh, we've got something going on here. We've got this level of trust built up. Is that what you're all driving towards?
Absolutely. You've summed it up better than I could have.
No, you're doing great. That was awesome. I really, really like that. I think that's a great point. Kevin, let's close out with the final 5. I think there's a lot of really great notes in the onboarding and training process and a lot that people can really take away from. So let's wrap up. These are the final 5 questions, Kevin. Rapid fire. I'll ask them. You answer them. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Give me your favorite sales related movie.
Oh boy. Tommy Boy.
Classic. Favorite sales book?
The Cadence of Excellence.
Do you remember who the author is?
I don't. Matt something.
Matt something. All right. I'll make sure I'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
Next time we do this, I'll have a second cup of it.
No, you're great. You're doing
great.
My
retention will be better.
No, Kevin, take me back to when you first got into sales. What do you know now that you wish you would have known when you first got into sales?
Everything.
Is there like one nugget or something out there that you feel would really be helpful?
Yeah, I think it's this. I haven't actually had anybody ask me this in a long time. There are going to be peaks and valleys in your career, right? But if you focus on the stuff that you can control, right, which is developing your skills, owning your inputs, things like that, over time, you're going to be just fine. Learn to roll with the punches, right? Don't get too low, celebrate your success, but not for too long. But just understand that if you focus on being a good human being, developing your skills and controlling what you can control, which are largely what you bring to, what the effort that you bring to bear every day, you're going to be just fine.
I like that. I really like that, Kevin. What's one of your favorite purchases of 2020 that's under $100? Doesn't have to be business related.
So I'm a White Sox fan.
Okay. Sorry to hear that.
Even though we recently departed the playoffs, I got one of these batting practice jerseys, swag, and I just love it.
That's awesome.
It's the coolest piece of swag I own, man.
That is awesome. And your favorite social media follow? It doesn't have to be business as well.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. Love it. All right, Kevin, where could our listeners connect with you if they want to do so?
I'm the profile's on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Phone number and email are somewhere in there.
Okay.
So feel free to hit me up at any time.
All right. Well, we'll link to your LinkedIn profile as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's Kevin Holland with Jellyvision. Kevin, thanks so much for taking us inside the sales playbook.
Thanks for having me again today. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Our pleasure.